So, our topic that we picked was MAID, which is the medical assistant in dying. So, what is MAID? MAID is a process where an eligible person, by request, can receive help from a medical practitioner to end their life. And the case study that we looked at is about a British actress named Liz Carr who suffers from a rare genetic condition that affects her joints and muscles and results in her being in a wheelchair since the age of 14, and she was diagnosed with that condition since the age of 7. She was visiting Toronto for this interview, where she was fighting against MAID, and she continues to be an activist to raise awareness against MAID, as she argues that people who choose medical assistance dying lack the resources and help they need. She believes that some disabled people feel pressured into choosing MAID as they lack the support that they need around them. And she feels like MAID is discriminating towards disabled people as they make it seem that death is easier than living. Now I'm going to be talking about its real world significance, but first I'm going to be talking about people who usually request MAID. So people who request MAID usually feel a loss of autonomy, a loss of independence, loss of purpose and enjoyment, want to end their suffering, or fear of future suffering, just loss of all that makes life worth living, and just feel like death is an easier option than living. And now I'm going to talk about the impact it has. So, MAID can influence how some people experience their end of life care, how healthcare workers have to make ethical decisions, and how a society supports vulnerable groups. It gives some people a sense of control over their suffering, but it also raises concerns for people with disabilities that may feel pressured into choosing death over life. It also impacts families and communities that must face the emotional and psychological damage when it comes to the decision of MAID. So having to make decisions for family members or friends, having to go through that grief is really difficult when choosing MAID. MAID is a huge national debate that has shaped human rights and social inequalities, making it a major issue in everyday life.
Good faith. Good faith disagreement. Most people who support MAID laws do so because they believe it's preventing misery. But in reality, the people that don't agree with it with MAID laws do so because they think it puts people with disabilities at risk. Understanding this allows us to see that the conflict is not between good and bad people, but instead over different views of harm. And good faith agreement is one of the views that people do agree with MAID are for older people, and it's seen as ethical because of their autonomy and letting them decide when and how to pass away, but mostly when they are experiencing severe suffering and losing of their independence and will to live. So that's why somebody would agree with MAID.
And now for philosophical challenges related to MAID. First off, we have scientific misinformation, uh, incorrect beliefs about MAID being suicide or withdrawal of care. With the few people I have talked to that actually are quite well informed about the MAID concept as a whole. Um, some of them argue that it's not really withdrawing care and having a medical assisted death, but some are arguing that's actually suicide of the person. And like I said, people are misinformed all over the place. You know, the internet with all the AI going around nowadays. People don't really know what to believe. So people will take misinformation, spread misinformation, intentionally, not intentionally. I've seen people do both. And now bringing on to our next point with actual the medical prognoses and life expectancy and suffering predictions. There's been several cases, you know, in everyone's lives, I'm sure that has been touched by this in some way. People will be given a certain life expectancy. Some people will unfortunately pass away way before that life expectancy, and some people will go on to live long lives, right? So the idea of MAID and receiving a medically assisted death could possibly lead to someone who choosing to pass away, and then that could have lived a long life based on, you know, maybe new treatment options that would come along. So there's definitely, like I said, there is lots of misinformation going around with not only what MAID is and what it does, but just with the medical prognoses themselves, which is to be less blamed. You can't really blame the doctor. Not everyone will know everything and how long you'll live exactly. Now for some social controversy, bringing examples from the real world that I've heard. Some people argue that MAID is expanding freedom for those with disabilities, choosing to have that death, but some are also arguing that it's an increase in vulnerability, and people with disabilities are now more vulnerable to taking their lives due to this option presented themselves, and that it's not really, some people are taking their lives or choosing to pass away with MAID, not because of their suffering and their actual sickness, but just because of the lack of care they actually receive, um, which can lead to a lot of controversy between people socially, whether in the tight knit group of someone affected by MAID, but also, like I previously said, a wider variety of people. And now for the next point, different views based on all aspects of life. We live in a very diverse world. There's many opinions, religions, cultures, influences. Everyone's going to have a different opinion. Some will be for this, some will be against this, and it's just the way life is. In everything in life, there will always be people that are for, people that are against, and people that are somewhat in between. And I think the best thing we can do, as I'll elaborate on my next slide, is to be educated on what the MAID actually is. But there will always be people with different views on things. And now for moral disagreement, individual independence and protecting vulnerable people from harm. Some people will argue that it's the individual independence of the person choosing to receive MAID going up against wanting to protect people vulnerable from harm. In this case, people who would be eligible to receive the medical assisted death. It'll just be almost an argument of, like I said, the freedom or the vulnerability. People will always have the disagreement that oh, this is no way for someone to die, or like this will relieve them of their suffering, and it's just the way it is, right? People will always disagree on things, but it's something, as I will continue to say, you have to be educated on it in order to really make a full opinion. And now for the call to action for MAID in Canada. So to begin with, we can talk about public education and awareness. Um, so the public in general, whether you're affected by someone with MAID, you yourself have a disability, or even just the general knowledge and general curiosity of MAID, you have to be more informed and well educated to make choices, whether that's you posting on social media um, something about MAID, or you're having this discussion with someone about MAID. You have to be, like in all topics of life, you have to be well informed, and you have to actually know what you are talking about. And now moving on to over to awareness. Some people don't even know what MAID even is. I spoke to someone the other day and they had no idea what it was. So not only are some people not educated on how MAID itself works, some people aren't even aware that MAID is a thing. To be in all honesty, I myself only found out what MAID was not too long ago, when I found out that Robert Munsch, one of my favorite authors from my childhood, was going to choose to have a medically assisted death. So that's when I started looking into things. And honestly, that's somewhat my fault. I only really educated myself when it was affecting my life. And I think with something like this, all people should at least be somewhat aware and somewhat educated regarding the topic. And now for the MAID policy improvements and readjustments. The policy itself does have some faults, clearly, based on according to what Liz Carr is saying. I think that, or personally, anyway, I can't speak for everyone, right? Just my opinion. That there definitely needs to be some adjustments made to the policy. For example, who can choose to actually have a medically assisted death? If they can make that decision for themselves, if they need help with others to actually make the decision. And overall, yeah, there needs to be policy changes, uh, whether for to receive MAID, but also to like not receive MAID. It goes both ways. For now, ethics and morals clearly. Some people will always disagree with this. Some people will always be like, "Oh, you have to, it's when it's your time, it's your time." I think people overall need to have a more open view to this concept. If someone's suffering, you're not in their shoes, you don't know what they're going through, right? So clearly, that could lead to some issues. And then, but also, if someone is deciding to, someone who is suffering and would like to choose a medically assisted death, they should look into it themselves in order to really educate themselves. And as previously discussed with some of the moral dilemmas, um, some people just need to know that it's okay, right? Some people will never accept that, but I think some people need to be more overall open-minded to the concept, as I think there are definitely some people who would benefit from something like this, someone who's really not doing well or someone who's really close to the end of their life, that this might work. And leading to our next point, research and decision making kind of connects back to public education and awareness in a way. Um, I had to do my fair share of research to actually make this project, to actually educate what MAID is, who it's available to, what it really does. And now decision making wouldn't really involve me, but more people who are actually receiving a medical assisted death. They have to make sure they know what they're informed, they really are confident in their abilities and they actually um, are aware of all aspects surrounding the medical assisted death. And here are the sources we used to make this slideshow.